Hello, everybody. Welcome back for this week's episode of our Bhagavad Gita podcast. So last week we began chapter 4, part 1, and we were looking at the theme of wisdom. We're going to continue on with that theme today. So welcome, Michael. Here we are for part 2 of chapter 4.
Thank you, Jackie. Hello to you, and hello, of course, to all our listeners. Well, as you just said, we'll continue on today with podcast 10 to conclude this amazing 4th chapter on gaining wisdom. So it's very important chapter, as I stressed all through last week's session. Knowledge by itself isn't of any lasting value. It has to be put into practice. That's the practical side of it. And then the knowledge plus the practice leads us into wisdom, because we can observe for ourselves what impact it's having on our lives. All right, so I'll continue on now with Krishna's teachings in this chapter. He continues to explain to Arjuna here that he welcomes whatever path a traveller is on to reach him. So there's different paths. We've talked about the path of knowledge, the path of action, the path of devotion. All of those three eventually have to merge anyway. But it's that notion of all roads lead to Rome. So if you're a seeker of truth, one way or another, if that's your goal, you'll achieve it, because you'll come in contact with the right people and so on. So he explains to Krishna, explains to Arjuna that he's created 4 divisions in society, which cater for the natural distribution of human qualities and instincts, for the harmonious workings of societies and the progress of humankind. This is often referred to in the Eastern teachings as the caste system, but it's got a bad reputation these days, because, like many things in the great teachings or in religions, the initial teachings gets pretty much mangled, Jackie, and it ends up being pretty much almost opposite or totally distorted to what it's meant to be. But he outlines here briefly what those castes are, or those 4 divisions in society. And as it says, to cater for each individual. And we all know that we've got different abilities and qualities, and that's why different people are in different groups of occupations, if you like, in their lives. So he, and the important part here, listeners, is that these divisions are there for the harmonious working of society and the progress of humankind. And if you start playing around with those, Jackie, and people say, oh no, this is what I'm really good at, but I'm going to do this job because it pays more money. Well, then you're going out of what's applicable to you, and you'll find that even after you get a bit of money, you're not going to be getting that satisfaction that you'd be getting if you were in your sort of rightful slot in that regards. So anyway, the classifications are these. He says, firstly, there's what's called the wise people. That's the introverts, the seekers of truth, people like us, really. But it also, of course, includes the great gurus, the great spiritual masters. Includes also the religious people like popes, and currently we've got a new pope. Priests and nuns in religions, monks. Rabbis, anyone who's working in sort of the area of God would come under that sort of religious or wise caste. And then the next caste he talks about, or the next grouping, are soldiers, warriors, but they include basically people under the broader heading of brave. So people like us on a spiritual journey who are brave enough to venture into a different sort of area of life, looking in different directions, and brave enough and courageous enough to put all these teachings into practice, we'd come under that warrior class. And remember, in chapter 1, we said we're like Arjuna, we're a brave warrior, and we're prepared to fight this battle for the truth and to discover the higher self within us. That includes like police, not just soldiers, but policemen, firefighters, anyone who's in a situation where they're risking their life in their occupation, or even in some of the sports where there's high contact, would sort of come under that category as well. You need a certain amount of courage and bravery to be doing that. Then he mentions what's called the merchants. These are your financial castes. financial people, bankers and, financial advisors and so on, all the stockbrokers, all the people who run businesses and factories, farms, anyone who organises, employs people, or all to do with trade and money and so on. And then a final class is what's called the labouring class or the working class. So that's your tradies and your hairdressers and nurses and people who work on farms, the farm labourers, all those sorts of people. And he says, you must act, he says, and so learn to do so truthfully and appropriately and wisely. So in other words, we've all got to act. We've ascertained that over a number of podcasts now. So if you're going to act appropriately to your own nature, follow your own instincts, and that'll be a big step towards giving you happiness in life, and it'll also benefit all of society that you're living in. All right, Jacqui?
Sounds good.
Okay. So I'll continue on. Krishna now introduced Arjuna to the concept of karma. It's going to be lots of work on karma, but he's introducing it gradually, so I won't elaborate too much at this stage other than to refer what he's saying here. So Krishna now introduces Arjuna to an understanding of how our actions impact on us karmically. So in other words, for every thought, word or deed, there's going to be a karmic repercussion. There's a consequence, in other words. We once we understand that more clearly, we'll be very, very careful as to how we think and speak and act, knowing that it's going to come back on us in a karmic sense, either favorably or unfavorably, depending on what it is that took place. He says all people are different from each other due to their karmic legacy. What I've previously referred to, Jacqui, as a USB stick, or I'm calling it now our computer program. So that's our karmic legacy we brought in from previous lifetimes, and it's the one that's playing out in this lifetime. And how we're responding to it, we're either putting similar karma back onto our current USB stick that's playing, or if we're making changes, like many of us and our listeners I'm sure are, we're putting a different karmic impact on our new USB stick that's playing out. And it's not only to do with, or it's all based on this USB stick, but that also involves our individual nature or our personality. So your personality is slightly different to mine, but in other ways we're very similar. So part of your karma and part of my karma is that's our personalities, that's our natures. You've got 3 children, they've all got slightly different natures and personalities because of their USB sticks. And that applies to all 8 billion people on the planet. And that's why we're all different and why we've got what we call different natures or personalities. There's a reason behind it. It's not good luck or bad luck, or lucky I was born in Australia and not in, some slum somewhere in the world or something like that. There's a karmic reason for all of the things that are happening to everyone on the planet. Anyway, I won't elaborate, or he doesn't elaborate anymore on that at this stage, so I'll continue on. So Krishna now continues to explain that he welcomes whatever path the traveller is on to reach him, that he has created... Oh, sorry, I've just read that. Got a bit carried away there, wanted to go through the caste system again.
That's all right.
So having explained all this to Arjuna, Krishna now tells him that human beings alone have a choice as to action. Everything else in the creation, Jacqui and listeners, operates according to what's called divine plan. The sun's always there, the planets are all moving around, magnetism's doing what it's doing, gravity's doing what it's doing, the tides are coming in and out, lions are eating zebras, everything's according to divine plan. Only human beings, people like us, everyone on the planet, 8 billion, have got choice, free choice, freedom to do whatever they think, say or do. But they need to understand what I've just mentioned above, that there'll be karmic implications that go with whatever the choice is. So this is why he's advising about the notion of wisdom. So he's saying to us, well, if you're going to be always making choices, you've got free will, he said, I'll go on with what I've written here. So through wisdom, he says, they may be very busy with worldly affairs, but their heads and hearts stay in solitude. So we can be flat chat in family life, working life, all the rest of it. But the idea is we try and keep our senses under control, our mind and emotions as still as we can, and focus on what we're doing. And that will lead to wise outcomes. We make wiser decisions, whereas in the heat of the moment, we can be all over the shop, as I'm sure you and everyone else and myself would recognize from past experiences. So he says these people, and that's where we're aiming for, being wise, operating from our higher self, what I've been referring to often as the Buddhi, our Buddhi, and thus their actions are untainted by karma. So if we're operating from the as truthful an aspect as we possibly can, there's no karmic residue comes from that. Even if you sort of, in a sense, muck up, if your intention has been pure, the highest you can do, well, then there's no karmic residue there. All right, Jacqui?
It sounds good. I'm sure we're going to have a lot more conversation on this, but I'm just going to keep listening for now.
All right, okay, that's good. So in simple terms, Jacqui, we're gaining new knowledge here through Krishna's teachings and making corresponding practical changes in our daily lives in how we think, speak, and act. So, and in that regard, we're slowly becoming wiser. It's a very important part of our spiritual journey and our spiritual growth, this aspect of wisdom. And then there's a couple of little quotes I'll just refer to here that are just gentle, and I think most people would appreciate them. I've written, this wisdom is likened to a whisper. When we're ready, we hear it from all directions. So when the person's ready, they'll start hearing this whisper of the truth that'll help them on their spiritual journey. And there's a great poet, Indian poem called Kabir, an Indian mystic, and he illustrates this beautifully in one of his poems. He says, "Where are you searching for me, friend? Look, here I am, right within you. Here, right within you, am I." So it's a beautiful little poem, isn't it, Jacqui? Reminding us that what we're searching for, he's referring to God, of course. Don't search out there. It's not out there. It's inside. And so he says it beautifully. Where are you searching for me, friend? Look, here I am, right within you. Here, right within you, am I. And this is all our conversations, Jacqui, up to now, and continuing on from here.
It's so beautiful. It actually, in this moment, makes me almost want to burst into tears, those two little quotes. They're so deeply moving. It's interesting because when you paused, a minute or two ago, and I sort of said I had nothing to say, like often in these conversations, and as you and I are finding our rhythm, it's nice. Like I feel only to speak when there's either a genuine question I feel like our listeners might be curious about, or when there's a deep internal impetus to speak. And so 60 seconds to 2 minutes ago, there was no internal impetus. And you just saying those two small quotes, I just think, oh my goodness, like not only one, I'm having my own personal reaction and response in this moment, but there's a whole lot of things I feel naturally to draw in that perhaps some of our listeners would find interesting. May or may not, but anyway, I'll just share. So two thoughts come to mind. One is it's so beautiful, those sentiments, and that it is, God or the universe or the truth, but also perhaps for some people in the early stages, the whisper is even just listening to your own truth, your own inner self, because a lot of people, I think, are so disconnected from that. We can move through life and maybe we do hear a little prompt or a little whisper, do this, respond in this way. And people, and I know this for myself too, sometimes the mind is so quick to jump in. No, don't do that. Let's do this instead. And so people get so used to kind of smothering that beautiful little whisper of wisdom, or their truth or their higher self that's trying to kind of peep up, it just gets nipped off. So I think even just that reminder for so many of us, when we hear it, catch that moment if we can. And if the mind is jumping in saying, nah, come on, let's just do this like we've always done it, try and honor that, try and be true to it in that moment. And even if you've got people around you often applying a bit of pressure, like, come on, everybody, no, let's do this, let's go this way. If we can just kind of slow the whole situation down a little bit and be like, actually, hold on, like deeply and truthfully, I really feel to do this or say this or behave in this way, instead of just going with the group or going with the way we've always done it. Like, I suppose I'm just trying to convey those practical moments. How in life, if we've not been functioning like this on a regular basis, how do we slow this part down and capture it for ourselves? Because I feel like this is really deeply it's of prime importance in the spiritual journey. If we're not up to this bit, if we're not catching that voice of truth, there has to be a big enough pause in life where we recognize it and decide, okay, in this instance, I'm going to do differently. I'm going to listen and respond instead of just going the way I've always gone.
Yeah, well, you've summed it up beautifully as usual, Jacqui. Firstly, it delights me that you're having it. Those little quotes I read had that impact on you. And rest assured, I know 100% certainty that everyone listening had that same little response to some extent or other, because they're beautiful words, they're truthful words, and they have such an impact. But the other thing that you referred to is when you're saying, often we hear that inner voice, but then another voice kicks in and says, oh, no, don't do that, don't say that, this and that. Well, just a reminder to you and to everyone that that's your ego. That's the ego always. The first voice you hear, by and large, the rule always is that first voice anyone hears is 99% the truthful voice. The next one that comes in, louder and sort of overpowering and overbearing, is the ego. And it's got no idea what it's talking about. Come along with us and don't think those silly thoughts and all of that. So it's a two very important aspects there that you raised, Jacqui. And I'm sure all our listeners can relate to it. And certainly all my students over 30 years of teachings have related to me. And I can relate to it, of course, when I was a student, when in my early days and I was learning. That there's these moments, these gems that we hear or read, that enliven us, that encourage us, and then sort of say to us, oh, that was such a good feeling, that really resonated with me. And then we yearn for more. I want more of that. I want more of that. And so it encourages us to continue on our path until we finally get what it is that we want.
Mm.
Um,
I think just
so,
one other point on that, sorry to loop back
yeah,
to it, but again, I just feel like this is important for people listening, and I know it's important in my life too, is that sometimes the people we love the most and that are around us the most in life, they mean well, but actually sometimes they're also a deterrence. I know in my life, sometimes I've been in sort of social situations or out in the world and I've gone to do something. I'm following the internal prompt. But sometimes it might be my husband or my children or people nearby. They're like, no, don't do that. Because in their mind, they're thinking that goes against social norms. That's putting yourself out there a little bit too much. That's not keeping quiet and kind of keeping our head down and keeping us safe. That's doing something a little, too spontaneous or unpredictable or whatever. And I'm not meaning to imply that the things I feel inclined to do sometimes fall into that realm, but depending on our own personal appetite for sort of moving into, when I say risky situations, I'm not talking about dangerous situations. I'm just talking about taking a risk, as in being brave, being courageous, when this normal social circumstance might say, don't talk to someone you don't know. You might feel compelled to do that in that moment, but people around you are saying, oh, no, don't do that. That doesn't follow polite social conventions or what's normal. Like, no, let's just continue on our way. So actually, it's not just having the courageousness to do what we are feeling is truthful and right and useful in that moment. It's being aware that people around us might also be trying to sway or move us in different directions. And so there's almost another layer of strength needed to really hear the inner voice, to honor it and not be swayed in that direction also.
Yeah, well, you've raised a real can of worms there, Jacqui. We could spend the rest of the podcast just on that. Um, and I'd sort of prefer we didn't.
Yes, no, we'll keep
But
going with the material. It just
but
feels useful to mention, to
yeah,
bring it,
but
to name it, I suppose.
yeah, I want to just comment on it quickly because everyone listening will be thinking along those lines, or it's cropped up in their own minds. Your reference to our immediate family and our closest sort of circle of friends, um, there's a reason why we're in that sort of grouping. It's all karmic for them and for us. And this is this broader picture of karma, and they're there to um, be constantly pushing our buttons and constantly, not in a destructive way or nasty way, but remember that everyone's operating from their desires as well. And so there's a tendency that, your husband suggests, oh, no, don't do this, because he's thinking that that's the best thing for you. Um, but he can't put himself in your sort of shoes. So, you're then torn between two, aren't you? Like, do I follow his advice or my daughter's advice or my father's advice? Things like that. But this is where the courage is required for the seekers of truth, and you've got to back yourself. And once you start getting more knowledge, that gives you the certainty that you need. And the greatest courage for the people on their spiritual journey is that you're actually going to separate yourself from your families and society and friends, not in a physical sense, like, walking away into a forest or a cave, but in that you will be doing something that they're by and large not doing, which is continuing on your spiritual journey, because very few people are doing that in today's world. And so the person who's seeking truth finds eventually they'll discover that they're on a fairly lonely road. There's not very many fellow travelers on the road to truth. On the road to pleasure and instant happiness and gratification, there's millions of people on that highway. They're fighting over themselves to get to wherever they're going. But on the path of truth, there's not very many people. And so it makes it hard for the person seeking truth, because they're constantly being one way or another pulled back by these enticements of the rest of the people that they know. And as I say, there's no nastiness in it. It's just simply most people aren't operating from their higher self, and so they're operating at an egoic level. And then, and they might even be worried about people on a spiritual path, thinking something's wrong with them. Why have they stopped going to rave parties or not drinking as much or something like that? So there's enormous pressure in society, one way or another. The media, the politicians, financial advisors, everyone's wanting to give you advice. And these days there's a million podcasts, a lot of them, not worth a pinch of you know what. Um, and people wanting fame and wanting money and wanting all sorts of stuff. Everyone's driven by all different sorts of things. This is why it's hard work for the seeker. We've got to sort ourselves out in amongst all of that. And you've got no chance of doing it, Jacqui, or any of the listeners or anyone else, unless you get some truthful knowledge. Your truthful knowledge is your first step of escaping from what's called the world of bondage, the cycles of birth and death. The world's like a prison, but it's got gold on the bars, and we don't regard it as a prison, but in essence it is. And once we learn that, we want to. It's the prison of illusion, falsity, the untruths. And so once we get a sniff of that, which we have and all our listeners have to some extent or other, um, you more and more want to go down that path of truth and break free of all of that. But this will all unfold. Incidentally, Jacqui, we've just remembered this is our 10th podcast. So we're a quarter way through the 40 podcasts that we've decided we're going to do. So congratulations to you and to me that I've lasted this long, and to all our listeners. We're a quarter of the way there, folks, according to my mathematical calculations. So there's only 30 more podcasts to go, Jacqui, but we're going to soldier on bravely. We're going to fight this battle through to the end. But it was a lovely observation. As I say, more of that will unfold week by week. Every podcast is going to touch on what you've just highlighted there. So I've only given a little quick answer to you and to the listeners, but that's all the teaching just keeps on building on all of these sorts of concepts. All right, I'll press on, Jacqui. So in the next segment, covering pure action, Krishna describes to Arjuna how the actions performed by enlightened souls are free from desires and their corresponding bondage to the world. Well, we've really just touched on that, haven't we? He says, these ideas are new to you, dear friend, so listen carefully. So this is what I'm suggesting to all of you. That a lot of this is new to you, listeners. You need to listen carefully and you need to try hard to put it into practice. He says these ideas are new to you, so listen carefully. The wise ones, and this is describing what's ahead of us as we progress. The wise ones are ever content and need nothing, having disentangled themselves from worldly desires and the results that come from them, desiring nothing, expecting nothing, keeping his senses and his mind under control. Without greed, he continues to act fully in the world. By relinquishing all his desires, he merely acts truthfully at all times and thereby incurs no negative karma. So these are all the problems. Like how much of our lives, Jacqui, how many of our problems are from our expectations? We expect this person to say this or acknowledge us or do this and do it the way we want and when we want and all of these sorts of things. We have enormous expectations, and not only of other people, but of ourselves. Yeah, we expect to do this and we expect other people to do this and not do that and all the rest of it. So when we're free of those expectations, like if you've got no expectations, well, then you can never be disappointed, whether they're met or not met or whatever. You just deal with what's there. If they have been met, well, you're happy. And if they haven't been met, well, you're not unhappy because you didn't really expect them anyway. So yeah, you're understanding what I'm saying there?
I mean, that opens a can of worms. I won't really comment aside to say I mean, there's like a gazillion years of teaching just in one sentence, really, isn't it?
Yes.
We can go our whole lifetimes with that because we do have so many expectations and we're sold so many from Hollywood movies and everything else that, people will behave in certain ways or whatever. So the practice of not having expectations is huge.
Yeah,
Anyway, we'll just keep letting that slide,
we'll
but
have to leave that. Everyone else will be having similar thoughts, Jacqui. Just everyone, take a cool pill at the moment.
a chill pill.
A chill pill, yeah, whatever they're
Yeah, one
called.
step at a time.
Yeah. We'll get to it all, and it'll all fall into place, and you'll be ever so happy that so glad that you've partaken in these podcasts and listened to some new knowledge and taken it on board. Um, um, so we can see here, Jacqui, that there's nothing in any individual's life, including life itself, which doesn't have the Lord's consciousness or power behind it. Oh, I jumped the gun a bit there. I'm sorry. I'll just go back to the. Got a bit confused there with all of our ongoing conversations, Jacqui. Krishna now goes on to teach Arjuna about the many various changes that need to take place in the individual, arising from the working of their body, senses, mind, and emotions. He refers to them as sacrifices, known as yajnas in Sanskrit, or worship, or simply our attitudes or motives. So all of these need to change. He explains that Lord Brahman is the source of the entire creation and the continuous sustainer of it. A huge concept, Jacqui. Whole creation comes from consciousness and it's sustained by consciousness. Not many people have an awareness of that. But he's the cause of the bodies we've got, the very air we breathe, our food, our senses, mind, emotions, ego, all the knowledge we've gained when we're sleeping, working, praying, our wealth, our possessions, our joy, our suffering, and even our meditations. We can't have any of those, Jacqui, listeners, unless the consciousness is there providing it in one way or another. Every time we breathe, we're not aware of that breath. We just know we're breathing. And we know if we stop breathing, we're dead. Well, if the air wasn't there, if God took it away, consciousness took it away, Lord Brahman took it away tonight or now, we'd all die. So that's just a simple example of consciousness is in everything in the creation. a grain of sand, a blade of grass, a worm, everything.
I can't help myself. I have to interject with one more little story. So I shared with you before we started chatting today that we went to the market. We live near the South Melbourne market, and we went and got fresh fruit and vegetables. I must be particularly emotionally open at the moment because I had a little moment of gathering the beautiful fresh field mushrooms out of the box, and I'm putting them in the bag. And I just had a moment of, again, almost wanting to weep. These beautiful, big, open field mushrooms, and every little gill of the mushroom so like perfect and velvety and soft. And I just had a moment marveling as I stacked my half a kilo of mushrooms. Just like what a perfect miracle these little things are. Anyway, no need to comment, but I just couldn't help but share that. Like if we just open our eyes to the beauty, there are so many amazing miracles if we can just be open energetically to some of these simple everyday things. Like they can be so heartwarming and heart-touching.
Very simple example, just a mushroom, but listeners are listening and hearing the joy in you just with that description of the mushrooms. Well, that's exactly what I've just been saying. And more, all our listeners and you yourself will see this beauty in the creation, in everything in the creation and everyone in the creation. It'll be constant, that sort of feeling. So again, you nailed it nicely, Jacqui. And also there's a reference to acknowledging in this great creation, for us to acknowledge the great masters and any current teachers or books or podcasters or groups and so on that are helping you in gaining greater spiritual wisdom, and that is letting your light shine. So similar to you experience there with a simple thing like a fresh mushroom, more and more you and our listeners and anyone else on the journey, not just listening to me in this podcast, but any spiritual contact they make, people, books, as I say, whatever, there'll be a greater appreciation and a greater gratitude, because you'll come to realize, if you're not already realizing, that you can't be continuing on your journey unless you have the help of someone who knows a bit more about it to point you in the right direction. Like I wouldn't be here doing these podcasts if it wasn't for one of my great masters, Bill Mooney, unfortunately no longer with us, was a lovely mentor and teacher for me for the best part of 20 years. I'm just continuing on his legacy, and I'll have some people, I'm sure, from people I've taught and whatever, that will continue. And it's not his legacy or my legacy, it's the legacy of truth. And all through mankind's history, the great masters, whether they be the greatness of Krishna or Jesus or Buddha or Hermes Trismegistus, but all the people we recognise as gurus, Paramahansa Yogananda is a very recent one that was great. Shankara was one of my heroes. The Zen masters, Lao Tzu from the Tao tradition. Um, um, they're all messengers of truth, and I'm just playing my little role in it at this stage of my life, and in regards to whoever I come in contact with. And finally, Jacqui, after 50 years with my own daughter, so that's a little bonus for me.
It is.
So I'll continue on. In this sense, spiritual wisdom can be likened to a boat. Here's another nice little story. A boat takes us across a lake or across a river or something like that. Well, this little boat, the boat of truth, of wisdom, the boat of wisdom, takes us across from one entire ocean into another entire ocean, Jacqui. Okay, here it is. It can take you across the stormy, treacherous sea of life, the ocean of Maya, known as the ocean of illusion. This is the ocean of planet Earth and 8 billion people. It can take us from that ocean, this prison that I referred to, that we're not aware of as a prison. But that boat can take you into another ocean, and that's an ocean called the ocean of Satchitananda. Satchitananda meaning truth, consciousness, and bliss. So what we're all doing, listeners, Jacqui, everyone else, me, we're on a boat and we're moving ourselves across the stormy ocean of Maya, illusion, this world of illusion, and we're going into the ocean of truth. We're traveling across into another ocean. where there's just peace and bliss, true peace and true bliss and true happiness. And I'll give another example in, I think, the next podcast, when I'll be talking about the lotus flower and the lotus leaf. And that'll refer to this as well. So that's a lovely little quote too, Jacqui.
It is. That's a
I'm
boat we
mindful,
all want to be on, I think.
yeah, I'm mindful we're pressing on, but I'm nearly getting there. So we might be thinking here, Jacqui and listeners, that this is all a big ask, all these sacrifices, changes, and so on that's being suggested we make. Well, remember that if you're not prepared to make all these changes and sacrifices and so on, well, you're just going to continue getting what you've always got. So it's a pretty simple choice, and that was referred to in chapter 1 when we talked about, are you prepared to make a choice, crossroads in your life? If you haven't got the courage and you feel everything's all right where you are, well, you just stay where you are and you'll continue on. No problem. You'll just keep doing what you keep doing. If you're liking it, and that's okay. But if you stop liking it, if you're starting to get a bit suspicious about it, and you might think of wanting to make changes, well, then you'd be listening to these podcasts and this sort of knowledge and moving yourself out of it. So that's hopping into the boat and moving across from this one ocean to another. And Krishna now tells Arjuna clearly why, Jacqui, it's in his best interest to make these changes. Having gained the spiritual wisdom, thou shalt never again be confounded or confused. So I'm sure all our listeners and you, Jacqui, are all starting to realise, if you're putting it into practice and listening, that some of this confusion is starting to move out, shift out of your mind. And when you were saying, that sometimes you hear that little voice, but you hear the other voice overriding it, well, that was the confusion that we're talking about. And you're seeing what you're describing to me and to the listeners, that you're starting to see through that. So you see how that confusion is being removed, and because of the truthful knowledge you've been gaining, not just through me, but you've been doing other reading and other work on yourself. So he says, having gained this spiritual wisdom, you'll never be again confounded and confused. And the reason you won't, listeners, is because you'll be operating from truth. And anyone operating from, there's no confusion or confounding in truth. It's certain, 100% pure, accurate, and no ifs or buts or maybes. Okay, we just got to move across gradually to that state. And furthermore, he says the power of that wisdom will allow you to see all my creation and all the people in it as your own true self and in me. And again, your little example there that you delight with the mushroom is you're able to see through your higher self, God's consciousness, the beauty of little mushrooms. And you'll continue doing that over the remaining years of your life more and more fully. And so we just get to the last few sections, Jacqui. So finally, to conclude chapter 4, Krishna reminds Arjuna how powerfully important this spiritual wisdom is. He tells him how purifying wisdom is, and that there is nothing in the world so purifying as the knowledge of the self. So there's nothing higher, listeners, than your higher self consciousness. And if you can achieve that or reach that or connect with it more strongly, any of those, you will find life much, much better for you. Further, he says, no matter how sinful a life a person has led, whatever evils have been committed in the flames of wisdom, all karma is burned to ashes. Now, that's a very, very encouraging comment, Jacqui. So if anyone's listening and you're thinking, geez, I said some terrible things, or I did some terrible things, or I thought some terrible things in any part of my life, rest assured, we all have one way or another. But the encouraging words here are really encouraging words, that it doesn't matter. You come to understand, Jacqui, listeners, that we all did whatever we did in the past, in the knowledge that we had in the past. And so we didn't know any better. We're in what's called a state of ignorance. We didn't know enough about the truth. Now that we're getting the truth, we won't be able to use that as an excuse anymore. But it's just simply saying that your sins will be forgiven as you move into the area of truth. And how they'll be forgiven is you'll burn them karmically within you. You'll end up saying, when you're presented with an issue, no, I used to think or say or do this when that used to happen in the past, but I don't like that anymore. I'm not wanting to do that anymore. And when you make that decision, that determined decision, well, then you've wiped it off your karmic USB stick. Does that make sense, Jacqui? All right. And the last little paragraph. Krishna now explains to Arjuna the benefits of him gaining this wisdom. He's saying those who have discovered their divine nature, who have renounced attachments to the fruits of their actions, who have used the sword of knowledge to cut through their self-induced ignorance as to who they are and what life's all about, and who have enthroned themselves in the freedom of their higher self, they've positioned themselves favourably. So I'd put to you, Jacqui, and the listeners, that that's what we're all doing through with these podcasts. We're positioning ourselves favourably. Notice the words, enthroned ourselves on the throne of freedom. These are all steps towards our eventual total freedom when we achieve self-realisation, but we can have gradual improvements and more freedom as we're going along in our journey. And the concluding little words from Krishna, and these are really beautiful, Jacqui. Krishna concludes by telling Arjuna, which of course is us, all of us, he says, "Arise, O best of men. Remember you're a mighty warrior. Fight bravely as you follow the path of wisdom on your journey through life." Yeah. Arise, O best of men. Remember you're a mighty warrior. Fight bravely as you follow the path of wisdom on your journey through life. How beautiful is that, Jacqui?
It's so beautiful. It makes me want to cry all over again. Well, not that I've cried here, but I could have a few times.
Yeah.
Very beautiful words, very moving words.
Yeah.
Well, it's the sentiment, isn't it? It's the sentiment and the energy of what it speaks.
Yeah. And I'll just show quickly a little picture in my book that showed that. Viewers might be able to see here. I've got what have I got there? Real and illusion. So this is the world of illusion. You can see a person on a string like a puppet. Knee-jerk reactions, all of that. That's how most people react. And here's a person here. They got it holding a sword, the sword of truth, sword of knowledge, and that's the sword you use to cut those strings there. That when you say, "Oh, the people said, oh no, come with us," and this and that, you can cut all that. You have the courage and the knowledge and whatever to do that. So this is the world of illusion. You think, when we're young, we think a person getting sawn in half is really being sawn in half. The person in the desert, been there, thirsty, dying, sees a mirage and runs for it and dives in, thinking it's a pool of water, and stands up, spitting sand. There's no water there. So this is this world that I was saying, a world of illusion that we believe to be real. But once we start getting suspicious about that, we start doing what we're doing now. We get accessing a truth, a sword of truth, because without the truth, you're not going to be able to cut those ropes of illusion. So the exercise, Jacqui, for listeners, is most of the exercises are going to be either observing or contemplating. In this exercise today, it's a combination of both. I'd like everyone to keep remembering whenever they can, practicing whenever they can, and observing whenever they can, if they're traveling on this path of wisdom. Do you feel you're starting to consider things differently and making wise judgments in decisions in your life? Okay. That's
Beautiful.
me done and dusted, Jacqui.
Wonderful. That's me done and dusted too. That's good timing.
Okay,
right,
listeners, I'm finished. Thank you for listening. Look forward to catching up next week.
Lovely. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with all of us. See you next week, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.